Okay. Welcome everyone. This is our Back to Basics series number 6, and we're going to talk about rubrics and grading criteria for your assessments. And I'm Veronica Manojlovic. I'm one of the instructional designers over at the Center for Teaching Excellence and Innovation, and kind of dubbed as the rubric queen in our department. But we'll move on to the next slide. And at the end of this Back to Basics workshop, you will be able to define what rubrics are and why educators use rubrics, identify the different types of rubrics, and identify the key elements of effective grading and rubrics. So before I move on, I want to ask, like, show of hands is, do have any of you gotten I'm sure a lot at some point in your teaching careers, you've gotten the question from your students like, why did I lose these points on this assignment? Or like, can you explain how you graded this and why you graded it that way? Like, you can do a thumbs up, either Ashley or Rachel. Have you ever had any of those questions? Yeah, I'm sure you have. I think every educator has gone through those questions, of why did I lose points and, why am I being graded this way? Or it's worse when they talk to their peers, right? And they're like, well, why did she get this grade and I got this grade, or these points? So using rubrics will kind of eliminate a lot of this ambiguity about grading and what the expectations are for an assignment. So what is a grading rubric? And hopefully this pops up. Um, I'm just gonna go through one of my easiest and best explanation of what is a grading rubric. And obviously there's many different versions of a rubric definition, but the best and simplest definition is what I found from the DePaul Teaching Commons website. And then it says a rubric is a scoring tool that identifies the various criteria relevant to an assignment or learning outcome, and then explicitly states the possible levels of achievement along a continuum of expectations. So, and then why use rubrics? So obviously one of the biggest ones is that rubrics brings transparency and consistency and efficiency to the whole assessment process while promoting student learning and fairness. Transparency and clarity, as far as like how you're grading your assessment. Rubrics clearly outlines expectations of a student performance for an assignment and how their work will be assessed. This helps reduce confusion and gives students a guide for success, which makes the grading process less mysterious and ambiguous. Consistency and objectivity, by setting explicit criteria. Rubrics ensures that grading is consistent across all your students, across all your courses, and even multiple graders, such as in nursing where you have multiple faculty, you can all be on the same page as far as how you're grading an assignment. This is also useful for any grading TAs that you have in there too, so that you all maintain the same level of consistency and accuracy in grading. It also minimizes bias and ensures that students are assessed along the same standards each and every time. Rubrics makes it easier and quicker for instructors to grade assignments while providing meaningful, targeted feedback. Students receive feedback that they can use to improve their future work on the assignment, and faculty save time while supporting student growth. Rubrics helps the grading, rubrics grading, the results of rubrics grading helps instructors refine assignments and teaching methods. Rubrics also provides students a tool for self-assessment. They can easily gauge their strengths and weaknesses on the subject, which leads to higher student engagement and better learning outcomes in the course. And then lastly, rubrics levels the playing field, making assessment criteria clear and reduces the chance for unconscious bias. This benefits all your students, particularly those who are new to academic expectations or those coming from diverse backgrounds who may need clarity in how are being graded. So it helps with a lot of your foreign learners as well because they may be coming from a different way of how they were assessed in their previous programs, and then coming to to the United States here and learning the whole grading process is quite be dramatically different for them. So using a rubric really helps with clarity and on any in eliminating any biases in grading. So in all, rubrics helps faculty grade fairly, efficiently, and transparently while enhancing student learning and academic achievement. And then there are some ideas of how to use rubrics. Um, you can use them for summative assessments and for formative assessments as well. And I think a lot of us are used to using them for summative assessments, but it's also very useful as far as formative assessments, engaging the progress of student learning, how your students are learning, and maybe what their strengths and weaknesses are also. Um, so for instance, rubrics for summative assessments are best graded using analytic rating scales that describe explicit performance expectations and ratings for each listed criterion. These are most appropriate for complex learning tasks such as research papers, case study analyses, or portfolio assignments. The criteria that you grade for these types of assignments should focus on higher order thinking skills. So your descriptors and your criterion should really focus on your higher order thinking skills when you're using them for summative assessments. And then rubrics for formative assessments can enrich the formative assessment by guiding the student in their learning, fostering self-reflection, and providing actionable feedback before a final grade is assigned for an assignment. Rubrics for formative assessments work best when paired with descriptive, actionable feedback. And rubrics written for formative assessments should support student revisions, peer reviews, and self-evaluations that will turn an assignment or an assessment into a learning process that's not just a grading event for students. So using it for like online discussions is actually really great because then you can gauge where the students are and how they're learning. In their whole process in the course. Also, like for simple things like project outlines, rubrics are great for that as well. And then again, peer evaluations and any reflection exit tickets, those types of formative assessments. And then I'll kind of go on and explain a couple what the two different types of rubrics are a little bit later. And then obviously we need to know what the components of a rubric are. The components of the rubrics are quite short. There's really only 3 components. um, but it can be really complex when you're trying to figure out how you're going to assess your student as far as writing your rubrics and creating that rubric. So the criteria should be related to your lesson objectives or course learning outcomes. So it depends on what you're using that rubric for. If it's going to be a summative assessment, a paper that they're writing at the end of the term, those should be related to your learning outcomes or course learning outcomes. And then obviously if it's like a short essay that they're writing for a unit, that those could be geared towards what your lesson objectives are or weekly objectives. And the criterion identifies what you're assessing for the assignment or exam. The performance levels or ratings are the levels of achievement and the point allocation. Those are quite simple, but those can get complex too, depending on how you want to allocate those points for the criteria. And then lastly, probably the most difficult part, I would say, in writing a rubric, especially an analytic rubric, are the descriptors. These provide descriptions or expectations for each level of performance or criterion. So moving on, so what are grading criteria? So grading criteria are the building blocks of a rubric. They define what exactly you are grading in that assignment or assessment. Um, if rubrics are used as a whole scoring guide, which provides criteria that are specific to what you want the students to meet in their performance levels. Effectively written criteria should be aligned to course learning outcomes. It should not just reflect what their effort is or what the length of the assignment is, but what they are actually learning. They should be observable and measurable. So again, like some examples would be that, supports claims of evidence or supports claims with evidence or shows signs of progress in your grading criteria. One big good pointer too when thinking about grading criteria, and especially those descriptors when trying to write them, it's always nice to refer to Bloom's taxonomy as well. So that gives you a good guide of like your higher order thinking skills. Like, what are my criteria? Am I like, yes, maybe some of it is a lower order thinking, like, they have to cite all their references, they're using grammatics and mechanics correctly, and those types of things. But then you want to move on to how are they aligning what they're learning to actual how they can apply what they've learned to this assignment. And then we're going to move on to what the two different types of rubrics. So you have a holistic rubric. Holistic rubrics provide a single overall score. It's a lot more efficient, but it's a lot less detailed. And this type of rubric gives a single overall score based on general criteria of the student's work as a whole, rather than breaking down into specific components. And again, this is why holistic rubrics are really good at formative assessments, because it helps you gauge where the student learning is, and then it provides a guide for students to see what their strengths and weaknesses are. And again, these are really good for even like writing a rubric for a discussion. Like even if it's a class discussion too, you can even use a rubric for an in-class discussion as well. You would just have to kind of grade as you're going, sort of, in the class, if you're trying to get a formative assessment of where your students are at. And then with the analytic rubric, this is a little more complex. It breaks down the tasks into criteria, such as organization of the paper, evidence, language, with the various performance levels. This is more time consuming to write and prepare, but it's much more transparent as far as grading. Each criterion is scored separately, and the overall grade is calculated by summing the individual scores of the criteria. Uh, and again, this provides very specific feedback on the student's strengths and weaknesses, and then areas that they need improvement on. So these are two good examples. These examples, I'll be honest, I had AI write me two examples of a holistic and analytic rubric because I didn't have time to go digging for some of them. But again, you can use AI to kind of guide you and assist you. I wouldn't solely rely on it because, again, you are the person that's grading, you know the subject, you know how you need to grade the students and assess their performance for an assignment. So you can like ask it general, like, you know, like descriptors, and it's pretty useful, but I wouldn't solely rely on it. And then lastly, we're going to, my slide is not showing and I apologize. So I was going to give you some ideas of how a grading rubric can be useful for grading. Let me see if I can pull this up somewhere where you can see it. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So for instructors, as you can see, great rubric can be useful for, again, as always, keeping grading consistent for all of your faculty that are grading within a course. And again, it reduces uncertainty on how you will grade student performance and maintains consistency in how you're grading each student. It enables faculty to refer to the descriptor without needing to write long comments for feedback. And it also enables faculty to identify areas of instruction that needs improvement or additional instruction. So if the student comes back to you and says, why did I score a 4 instead of a 5? You can just say, here's the descriptor, here's what I'm looking for. And just say, this is where you really kind of need to improve your assignment. And then for the student, oops, I'm gonna go back. Didn't click. 1 second, sorry. This is what when you try to be fancy and animate all of your stuff. There it goes. Okay. For students, it provides realistic expectations of how the assessment or assignment will be graded. It helps students identify their strengths or weaknesses and directs their efforts accordingly. And then it helps students target their learning for a particular assignment or assessment. And then let's see. So best practices for creating and using rubrics. And this is what I tell faculty all the time. Use what you have. I've seen a lot of faculty write all of their instructions out like an outline form, and that's a great start to what your criteria and what your descriptors are going to be, especially your criteria. And again, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. There's plenty of resources online as well. You can like search and try and get some examples of a certain type of rubric, how someone else has built it, and then kind of tweak that to your assignment or assessment. And don't overwhelm yourself by creating a rubric for each and every assignment in a course. Target where you really need your rubric. If it's a capstone paper, again, you would have, a summative assessment at the end of that assignment, the cumulative grade, but then you can also chunk that into like smaller holistic rubrics throughout the assignment. Let's say they need to provide their thesis. So that you can have an assignment where they're working on a thesis and you're providing a holistic rubric for how they're going about establishing their thesis. And whether it's going to be a valid thesis and all of that. So there's a lot of different ways you can kind of chunk it into smaller rubrics and then just provide that big analytic rubric at the end for that assignment. You can also use the same rubric for multiple assignments. And the great examples, again, is a discussion. You can use the same rubric each and every week. You don't have to essentially write one rubric for each discussion. You can provide, and also a good best practice is to provide the rubric to students at the beginning of the course with the assignment, letting them know, hey, this is a huge assessment. Here's a rubric. This is how I'm going to grade this. And it gives them a little time to kind of look through the rubric, read through it, ponder, and figure out like to make sure that I score 5. Also, most importantly, to be sure to attach that rubric to the assignment as well. So if you're giving them instructions on the assignment, make sure you add as well. So those are kind of important keys to make sure that the student knows where the rubric is and has using wide range of scores is not really recommended for the markers of quality, but a small range is okay. Now, if you're giving a range of like to 10 point difference, that's Um, it's kind of not really recommended because then if you score one student, you know, a 6 and another one a 10, you're gonna have to do a lot of explaining, right? You're gonna have to provide a lot more feedback to the student on why they scored a 6 and versus a 10. And then again, if they're talking to their peers, they're like, well, why did they score 10 and I scored a 6? A small range is okay, like 2 or 3 point range, but anything more than that kind of gets a little more complicated. And then lastly, keep a file with all your feedback responses and use those to help write your descriptors. And I'm sure even if, you've had a file with feedback responses, you can kind of refer back to those and use those as a starting point for your descriptors as well. And then I'm going to, here is a list of my resources. So these two are articles. They're pretty really good at explaining rubrics and how they're used in higher education. And then these three are the different universities that just have really good web pages on writing rubrics and stuff like that. So you can refer to those and it gives you a guide on how, and they're each different, like the Carnegie Mellon one and then the University of Utah and DePaul. They all provide information on rubrics, but in a different way, different format for each of those. And then this leads me to the end. I thank you all for attending this Back to Basics series workshop on writing rubrics. And of course, if you have any questions or need help in writing rubrics, you can reach out to me, or you can reach out to any one of us at City by emailing us at city@rush.edu. Thanks, everyone.